been a whole year since last time. Last time we were right in the thick of it, weren't we? We walked around the show. We did an interview at Christmas with Jessica. Jessica from AudioShake. We did one of our Christmas interviews, which went really well, and I really enjoyed talking to you. And it's been so much has happened in the whole kind of AI world. Just to recap, AudioShake are sort of premier leaders in using AI for stem separations, for things like, maybe creating assets for projects where multitracks don't exist. Right. And then you take a vocal off, you maybe need a TV mix, or you want to restore it, or you want to remaster it, whatever. I mean, you guys are kind of leading the field with that. And obviously now, AI has become almost a completely different proposition since the last time we spoke. What's happened, do you think? Do you think it's just the publicity that's been going on, or what's...
I mean, AI itself isn't anything new. It's a really vast field, right? When you are taking an Uber, you're using AI. When you're using your credit card, I'll separate this for you afterwards.
Thank you.
No problem. There's so many things in your daily life that you wouldn't even think about have an element of AI in them that do have it in them. And so there's been this explosion, I think, around the awareness of AI tied to generative AI. But the actual space of AI, like really the easiest way to think about it is very, very sophisticated statistics. So the area that we work in is called source separation. But when we're talking about it in music, we would say stem separation. And other fields, they might just say, well, streams or split separation. But essentially, it's not generative. It's a different area. And so, yeah, it's been interesting to see all of a sudden so much interest in the field, so many questions around everything from training data to what's possible or what isn't, of course, like the implications of these technologies. And I would say that compared, certainly thinking about Namm, I felt like the conversation last year was very heavily dominated by questions around training data and ethics. I don't think those have gone away at all. But I do think that there's also, in parallel, at least as many questions, if not more, around more the practical uses of AI. Because I think so many musicians, producers, mixers, people are using these tools in all kinds of ways.
One thing that's really been blowing up, I think, this year is the generative AI was in its infancy when we spoke, and that's really sort of ramped up with Suno and all these other kind of services, which are now kind of creating almost these sort of copyright farms where people are generating stuff and then registering it via YouTube digital ID and things, and then claiming it when stuff. It feels like it's almost being kind of misused in some ways because it hasn't really been properly thought about. I mean, I'm guessing it's like I'm asking you because you work in AI, right? You are a representative of that, Right. So you must find that you're having to justify somehow the other things that AI are doing when it's really not applicable to what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I would say yes in the sense that people just ask a lot more questions now that they didn't ask a few years ago. So they'll ask, do you license content? Well, yes, we do. Do you train on my input? No, we don't. Is it generative AI? No, it's not. So they ask questions that never would have come up a few years ago. At the same time, because people have been we've been around for 4 years, people have been using our technology and being able to do all these really cool creative or even revenue generating opportunities through it. I think there's a level of trust there and understanding, and also, and certainly with a little bit of conversation, understanding that the technology is fundamentally different. For example, if you were to think about the training data, if I was wanting to build a generative music system, either I'm going to go license or I'm going to scrape content across the web with the full mix of a song to learn how songs are made and song structure and so forth. For stem separation, it's quite different, right? You need to be able to train on thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of stems. So first of all, you're not going to go out and just scrape hundreds of thousands of stems.
Exactly.
And you don't actually need to have Elvis's tracks to separate Elvis. What you need is you could go and license from a production library.
Like Elvis, yeah.
Right, and then and in fact, the quality of the track is not so important, right? I'm just as happy to get your jam band, which I'm sure is great, Nick.
Oh yeah.
But to get your jam band stems as I am to get, some Grammy, whatever, like some platinum artist type of thing. Because it's actually more about teaching the qualities of sound and frequencies and those kinds of things. So it's a very, very different versus like if I was doing a generative system, I probably want that platinum selling artist, you know?
Well, the other thing that, I mean, it's interesting because obviously, I don't know whether what the structure of your company is, whether you've got investment and stuff, but there must be a lot of pressure now because there's so much pressure to monetize what AI is doing. In many ways, you were there first, so you're making a profitable business out of something that already exists, where there are these huge they're burning billions of dollars in building training data, and yet there doesn't seem to be any kind of there's no income coming from it. So my concern is a little bit that there's a limited time window, isn't there, before all AI, anything that's got AI in it, will be tarred with some kind of brush. Oh, that's now no good. So now it needs to be called something else because it's no longer okay. But
yeah, I mean, it's possible. I would say that AI is a little bit different from, say, because I think an obvious parallel to what you're saying is something like crypto, right, and blockchain, where there's this huge wave of investment and everything was going to be on blockchain and we were going to solve all the world's problems all on the blockchain. And then now you just do not hear about it the same amount, even though some people are still building on it. I think AI is a little bit different in that it certainly existed before this current boom. I mean, what is web search if not like that is also like machine learning and all kinds of things. And so, I think that investors understand that there are many, many different kinds of AI. I think if you narrow on generative AI, I do think there's a lot more pressure now around, yes, how do you monetize this stuff? And I think that I actually think that we will see some of these generative tools in music. I think what we're going to see happen is when you sometimes just listen to people on the traditional instrument side or traditional music making side, the music industry, sometimes we'll talk about the generative tools all in terms of it's going to destroy music or it's going to destroy it, like you have that narrative. And then you also have the narrative on the other side, kind of the tech bro narrative of like, music is too hard to make and we're going to democratize access to music.
Yeah, well, there was
right,
what was
the Suno one.
that was I nearly talked about it in Sonic Talk, and I was just thinking I can't. It's just too depressing a concept. It's like,
well, I think we can come back to that. I think I understand what he was trying to get at. He worded it exceptionally poorly. But I think you have these two kind of poles, right? And I think the reality is that we're a year from now, 2 years from now, some near future, you're going to see the DAW world move closer to generative, where it's going to be an assistive tool that's going to, you're going to create with it the way you create with a whole bunch of different kinds of software.
Super clippy.
And it's going to be, well, just in the sense of it's just going to open other doors and possibilities, and you're going to hear something that interests you, and then you'll riff with that. And I think on the generative side, a lot of those tools are going to move closer to the DAW. And so you'll see them building more and more traditional features for music making. And I think where we end up is somewhere in the middle.
I suppose the thing that scares me thinking about those terms is, the people who are making the generative stuff, a lot of their financial model appears to be owning the copyright of the stuff that is generated. So I don't want them anywhere near my creative process in case they're suddenly able to claim my slightly non-existent output. The other thing that I've also been noticing, and I don't know if this is me and the fact that, I'm in Namm and it's just wall-to-wall music, which has sort of almost no meaning, the same guitar solo, the same kind of riff, because that's how you used to demo things. But the term slop seems to be gaining a kind of momentum. And it's really interesting because when you hear the kind of party trick generative stuff, you sort of go, it's really clever. I'm convinced, but it's sort of it's meaningless in many ways. And I'm kind of, I know this is very different to what you're saying, but you're an expert in the field, or at least operating in the field more than I am. So I guess I'm asking the question. I'm not asking you to represent the AI industry.
No. I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because let me pretend to be Nick for a second, and how I think you have worked as in the music industry,
right,
deeply technical, right? Ability to do things with sound the average person can't do, right? I think there's a huge swath of people that could be brought into the music making process, could be brought into lots of different kinds of artistic processes, like forget about music, that are that get intimidated by it or that get pushed out of it very quickly. And just to give you a couple of examples of things that are in my head. I remember when my son turned 6 or 7, both my husband and I play instruments. Of course, we thought it'd be great for our kids to play instruments. And we put We like slid a guitar in front of him. We tried all these different subtle ways next to the broccoli, maybe put some drums, it was not interested at all.
Drum-shaped potato
Yeah.
wedges, yeah.
And then I tried melodics, right? And so he was playing, it was a software, like got a Roland, hooked it up, and he was playing drum pads. And it's all kind of gamified and very fun. And he starts essentially playing drums. And at first I was like, is he learning music? He's learning some sort of rhythm. And then I saw him in the car and he was drumming on his leg. And then we hooked up that to an electric drum kit and he starts playing that. And now he's actually back to regular drums and taking drum lessons.
Oh, okay.
And I think, and that's maybe an example someone would have given 5 years ago of like technology and traditional music making, but is generative necessarily so different? If you could, someone like me, where I play the piano, I play bass, but I've never really attempted, I'm not so sure I'd be good at, like composing an entire piece, bringing in multiple instruments and filling out the sound, and the same way that someone can go into a room and decorate a room, which is also a very abstract concept to me, right? And the idea that I could play a melody on the piano or play something, and then there could be something that is almost like a co-collaborator
that would fill it out.
Right.
I guess co-pilot,
right,
isn't
and
it?
that might be suggesting something to me, and the thing that it suggests may not be what I want, but what if it got me thinking in a new way? And I've certainly found that with I do a lot of fiction writing, and I was stuck on a particular chapter in this novel I was writing, and I needed to have a Ferris wheel, which like we all know what a Ferris wheel is.
Yeah.
But I could not write it the way I liked it, and I was like, oh, people seem to use ChatGPT for this. Like, let me try it out. And I essentially asked it to describe a Ferris wheel and pretend it was like a literary fiction writer. Anyway, what it produced was slop. Exactly what you said. It was kind of like almost like a parody of someone writing in some sort of literary style. And it was useless. But in one of the paragraphs that it gave back to me, it decided to focus on the gondolas in a Ferris wheel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that they were swinging. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Like, I'd never thought about the gondolas. And so I was like, you should consider the gondolas. And so I ended up writing that in. Didn't write what it included at all.
But it
had given me this
something.
idea. And so I think that's what I'm saying about these things like meeting in the middle is I think that it's hard for me actually to imagine that most people creating music in the future aren't going to use different kinds of assistive tools that are going to suggest certain things that, again, they may not take it wholesale, but it may send them in a new direction in the same way, someone playing next to you might have.
I appreciate that. It makes me feel a little more positive about the whole thing, because I guess I think just the sheer amount of stuff that can be produced artificially tends to sort of have this sort of weird effect on the greater body of work. How does one step away from just being generic kind of, what's the difference between music or stuff that's written purely for advertising, vacuum cleaners, that is not destined for mass consumption in the same way? How do you differentiate all of that stuff from music that has emotional meaning? And the more there is, the harder it kind of becomes for us to figure it out. And it sort of goes against, because much of this technology, much of the services, much of the things that we use are based around convenience. Even streaming music is a convenience. It's less convenient for us to go to the CD closet, pick up a CD, think about what we're going to put it on, change it, maybe take it off, put it. That's too inconvenient for us as a species. Almost, it feels like. So to be able to then take prompting and take it away, maybe we won't lose that ability for critical thought and individuality, but bizarrely be helped by AI to do that.
I think so. I think that the most likely outcome of all this stuff, when you've gone through wherever the legal battles net out, as tools, more traditional tools move to incorporating generative, and generative moves closer to, say, not necessarily the DAW as it exists today, but to other kinds of creation, I think you will see a meet in the middle. I don't think that actually gets rid of the other thing you were talking about, though, which is I do think there's a very legitimate problem that existed before generative, which is just the flooding on streaming platforms of music that's largely being pushed by bots. And generative has just made that easier, right? And that you could generate lots of content, and then provided you can figure out the part around how you essentially commit streaming fraud. So I think that is a very
it's almost
problem.
legitimized. I mean, I was reading a story about how Spotify now are taking the genre-based playlists and replacing the artist-based things, specifically in the kind of relaxation and ambient stuff.
I think that's been going on for a long time.
I just wasn't aware of it, and it just sort of feels like, wow, okay, but maybe if that's okay, is that okay? It sort of feels like music I can fall asleep to, music I could drive to. I don't want it to be challenging. I don't need to listen to the lyrics. I don't want any of that. Does that make our relationship with music less complex? It's just then it becomes commodified, sort of almost.
It's a good question for when you talk about music that doesn't have a connection to the artist in a knowable way by the listener, right? I think that music today, for so many of us, there is a deep connect. Like we tie so much of our identity to music, right? Who's creating it and what? Right, absolutely. But and so the idea of all of a sudden that Taylor Swift is going to get replaced by some avatar. I mean, sure, maybe, but it doesn't seem as compelling to me, right? Like I think we like to know. If we didn't care about all this stuff, then why would the Kardashians be so popular, right? Like we like the mess and the drama and the personality. It's not just the song in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah.
And what does that mean? You're right. When the music is perhaps instrumental or it's right, like it's something where we never consumed it. It was created by a human, but we never consumed it with that extra layer of larger cultural connection. And it was just the sound itself. I think that you're like, I think that is a.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because I mean, it's now you go to people go to thrift stores and buy. They used to be able to buy kind of music and library music on vinyl, and now it's sort of collectible and is a thing because the quality is even perceived to be, it's like the Overton window has shifted from kind of like, well, that's good, this is good. Now it's like, yeah, this is much better than that, because that's so bad that this the less bad stuff seems better than perhaps it was at the time. So what's happening with AudioShake then? What's kind of big news? What's next for you guys?
We've been doing a lot of work. I mean, continue to improve the models and all the models that we use on the music side. We also do a lot of work in film and TV separation, so separating dialogue, music, effects, speakers, those kinds of things. And then also just trying to make things faster. So we started off in post-production workflows, but now we also can do a lot of things on device. So running offline or running in really low latency scenarios. For example, Antares is demoing here an app that they have coming out in a couple of weeks called Vocap, which allows you to sing into the app. And then it's going to separate your, so say you're in the street and you have this idea, you could sing into the app. Or maybe doing
an interview in a busy corridor. Yeah.
A great example, yes. But being able to speak or sing into the app, and then it's going to separate with AudioShake, and then it's going to, it will do different kinds of pitch correction and things like that, but also allow you to apply all kinds of different vocal effects. And so giving someone who doesn't necessarily have a studio something, an experience like that.
Something that's usable. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I suppose the other thing that must be a big deal, and this is the thing that's going on certainly with LLM building, is those tweaks to the underlying technology and algorithms, that reducing compute required by small percentages. I mean, it makes a massive difference to the bottom line for all of this kind of computing. I mean, I guess you guys must have to be
though it's not in the case of when you're talking about running like on edge devices, it's actually not a cost thing, so to speak.
No, I suppose,
it's actually opening up use cases that wouldn't exist otherwise, because if you can also run on the device, then you're running on the device's hardware, right? You're not actually using anything in the cloud. You can sometimes run things faster. You can run it offline. You can think of different kinds of content security workflows where something doesn't want to connect to the internet. And then for anything and then fundamentally, above all, it's about speed. So if you can shrink these models down and get them to run, really get them much, much smaller and run them quickly, then all of a sudden you're returning the results in milliseconds or seconds, right?
I think we're probably heading towards a final conclusion, because we now have a PA demonstration.
You got the music, yeah.
You got the music.
Yeah.
Jessica, it's been lovely to catch up with you. I hope you had a good Namm. We're all kind of tired, I guess. The weather's coming, at least the rain's coming, it looks like, so everything's going to be wet, which is great news for around here.